Lockdown football is what they're currently going through in France at the moment. Nothing doing until August. Hi again, Will Downing with you alongside Mark Rodden, Stephane, Jauny, Dmytro, Dzhulai, and today Matt Spiro, who'll be talking us through the renaissance of French football and the current shutdown in the sport in France. A great walk down memory lane for me last night. The video archivist Kylian M2 did a video premiere of the 1985 FA Cup final replay between Liverpool and Manchester United. The drawn semi-final is the first live club game I ever remember watching in full. The Milk Cup final I decided to go out playing halfway through between Norwich and Sunderland. Now, I'm sure I must have watched previous cup finals, but I just don't remember them. So, gentlemen, what's the first game you remember watching? And I'll start with you this week, Matt.
So the first game I remember watching, it almost certainly wasn't the first game I watched, but the first game I vividly recall was Watford against Everton, the 1984 FA Cup final. Because I grew up in Pinner, which is quite near Watford in northwest London. A lot of my mates were Watford fans. I was a big John Barnes fan. And I just remember it being a really special event, and the whole of Watford and the surrounding area was getting very excited. So I remember that. But I think I started going to watch Arsenal, and I saw, like most Arsenal fans at that time, I think I saw a series of 0-0 draws before I actually saw a goal. But I can't remember the first game that I saw at Arsenal.
How about you, Mark?
I have a really good memory of watching Ireland against Romania and the penalty shootout in World Cup 1990, David O'Leary's winner. I was about, 6, going on 7. But the game I really remember is one I listened to, because I listened to a lot of 5 Live and BBC Radio Scotland, and parents from Donegal grew up listening to Celtic matches on BBC Radio Scotland. It was Liam Brady's Celtic, October 1991, away against Neuchâtel Xamax in Switzerland. And Celtic lost 5-1 with the Egyptian Hossam Hassan getting 4 goals. Brian O'Neill getting the reply for Celtic, and I think Celtic won the second leg 1-0. That set me up for a life of crushing disappointment, hope, and then disappointment in terms of following football teams.
Stephane?
My first game I remember was Nantes Saint-Etienne. It was one of the big games in the 80s. I think it was 1983. I was very young. I can't remember exactly, the score. I was with my dad, and it was a great night, evening game, as usual in France. Well, at the time anyway, things had changed with TV. In the 80s, Nantes Saint-Etienne was the biggest rivalry in French football. And if you want me to get another game, the World Cup in 1982, France against Germany. In the semi-finals, I was still a young boy, but I remember vividly the celebration with Alain Giresse when he scored that famous goal, and Maurice Trésor, who never scored goals, basically, and Michel Platini. And definitely my 2 first games in football, which I remember to a certain extent. But Nantes Saint-Etienne, the atmosphere in the stadium was Marcel Sopin. The stadium that doesn't exist anymore is used for the academy, but the stand, there's only one stand. The other stand has been destroyed and replaced by apartments, which is very strange. But it was a very tiny, small ground, 20,000, and very close to the pitch, and a great atmosphere right beside the La Loire. It's a big river in France. And it was a great night of football for a young kid.
Dmytro?
Well, it's got to be World Cup in 1982. I do know that I watched the very first game of France v England. But of course, the one that made the biggest impression was the Soviet Union with Brazil in the first round, because it was a fantastic game, and I have those memories from that particular game. So I think I'd probably have to say this one, because I only have a vague recollection of France v England, but that game, with Brazilian team especially, just something to remember. And also, Will, you forgot to mention that football is back in Costa Rica.
So back over to Paris and Ligue commentator Matt Spiro, host of Le Beau Jeu, the official Ligue podcast. New book coming out as well, by the way, Sacre Bleu, From Zidane to Mbappé, A Football Journey. We'll touch on that a little bit later. The shutdown in France, Matt, how's that been viewed overall?
Hi, Will. It's been viewed sort of, a little bit like in other countries, I think, insofar as people don't think the instructions have been that clear. The government's come in for a lot of criticism. There have been lies about the fact that nobody needed to wear masks, and actually they didn't have masks in France initially, and that was why they were saying that. So, yeah, there's been the usual sort of discussion and controversy. It's been stricter actually here, certainly, than in the UK, where my family are, where, you know, you can basically go out without being checked all the time. Because here in France, we've had to fill out an authorization form every time we want to go out, even to walk the dog or to go and buy some bread or something. But yeah, look, we've got through it in some respects because the lockdown's been eased 10 days ago, and my kids have sort of started going back to school, only sort of 1 or 2 days a week. But yeah, it's been a very strange period, and we also know that the football was stopped very quickly. So we haven't had so much the debate, when is the league going to start again? Because as soon as the Prime Minister said there's going to be no sport until September, the French league had an emergency meeting and they said, well, listen, we're stopping the season now. We're going to give the title to PSG. We're going to work everything out on a points per game basis. And yeah, 2 teams have been relegated. There's been a lot of arguing, but there's been no debate about when the league is going to start, because it is not going to restart.
And was there general unhappiness or acceptance that that was it, the league's called, we're done?
I think initially, of course, and there was, you know, anger, particularly from the 2 teams that were relegated. But I think initially, generally, people accepted it. And then the longer we've gone on and the more people have been hearing about other leagues, and, you know, obviously the Bundesliga starting, and we've had different clubs taking legal action against the league, and we've had Lyon and their president, Jean-Michel Aulas, who is very outspoken and also very powerful in the French game, taking legal action and still sort of campaigning for the league to restart, you know, saying it's not too late, we can change our mind. So I think in more recent days, people have thought, well, hang on, maybe it was a bit hasty. Maybe we should have waited a couple of weeks, looked into all the different possibilities. But yeah, the main thing, to be honest, Will, in France, I think it's similar in a lot of countries, you know, the finances are driving these decisions. Then in France, I've got a new TV deal starting in August with Media Pro, who've come in, and the new French domestic deal is going to be absolutely huge. It's more than €1 billion, first time it's gone that high. And I think the French league decided they needed just to make sure there was no way Media Pro could back out of this deal. If, for example, they said, we're going to try and finish this season and we might have to push next season back to January, you know, that might be giving them a chance to say, well, hang on, we're not going to give you this money. And then French football would have been, you know, in enormous trouble. It's already in big trouble. But yeah, if that TV deal fell through, it would be the end for a lot of clubs, I think.
By the way, how much of a surprise was it that Media Pro came in to launch a new channel, because they are known as a global distributor and not, you know, an outlet to watch?
Very surprising. It was surprising that the deal was that lucrative. Like I said, over $1 billion. I think the last deal was just under 700 million. So it's a massive increase at a time when Ligue, you know, I wouldn't say it wouldn't warrant a massive increase, but there's not been a lot of suspense, you know, in terms of PSG just walking the league title over the last couple of years. So it was a big surprise. And the fact that Media Pro came in, not even a French company, and have put this money in. There was surprise. There were also reports about how Media Pro had been talking to Serie A, and that Serie A had done their due diligence and decided that they didn't want to go with Media Pro because they weren't convinced about the financial guarantee. So there was concern in France, particularly because Media Pro have taken quite a lot of time. They've been leaving it quite late to sort of set up their channel. So people have still been thinking, well, hang on, are they, you know, they're not going to sort of walk out on us at the last minute, are they? But they are finally sort of getting things set up now.
Sort of the timing is quite bad for a number of elements. Is it a good time to bring a book out? Obviously, it was taking a long time to write and to, you know, go through the various drafts and so on, and then this happens. Yeah,
it's a good question. I don't know is the answer. I would, you know, the fact that bookstores are closed at the moment, as far as I'm aware, in the UK, I don't know if that's the case in Ireland, would suggest it's not a great time to bring a book out. The book industry has obviously taken a big hit. I think it is slowly starting to sort of to wake up a bit again. You know, the flip side is that people, certainly during the lockdown, have a lot of time on their hands and probably are keen to read about things other than COVID. And also newspapers, podcasts and radio stations are keen for other things to talk about. So, you know, I'm hopefully getting a bit of publicity for it. The reason that we brought it out and I sort of busted a gut over Christmas to try and finish this book was to try and bring it out before the Euros. So when the Euros were postponed, I was certainly thinking, do we put this back? There may be an updated version to come out before the Euros actually do take place, if they take place next year. But look, I don't know. Yeah, ask me that question again in a few months.
Okay, we'll bring you on in a few months. But the process of putting it together, you've done a bewildering amount of interviews, a lot of legwork, and the angle that you're taking going into this about, the rise, the fall, the rise again.
Yeah, well, I mean, I moved to France in 2002 at a time when the national team was having its first sort of implosion since winning the World Cup in '98 and then the Euros in 2000. And it's just been a roller coaster. It's a bit of a cliche, but the French have either been brilliant, winning World Cups or getting to the final in 2006, or they've just been utterly dreadful, not only in their performances, but also in their behaviour. And it's just quite interesting, really, the relationship the French have with football. Obviously in '98, the Black Blanc Bleu team was thought to have this massive sort of unifying social impact. It was fantastic when it happened, and I was at the World Cup in '98. It's when I first maybe fell in love with France and French football. But it was only momentary, and there have been a lot of race-related problems, social problems in France in the last 20 years, unrest in the French suburbs. And the link between football and society in France is a very strong one, partly because a lot of the football players are from immigrant backgrounds. And just like when they won the World Cup in '98, everybody was saying, how fantastic it is to have people from all these different countries, all these different cultures coming together to win a World Cup. When things started going wrong, when the team went on strike and when there were all sorts of scandals and problems off the pitch, politicians and certain people in the media were very quick to say, this is a reflection of our society and the problems that we witness in French suburbs, the suburbs of Paris in particular, where there has been a lot of unrest, there has been a lot of violence. And I thought in 2018, it was absolutely, incredible again. Because you think the second time, the first time you win a World Cup, obviously the country goes absolutely crazy, and that's when football really took off in France. But 2018 was amazing as well. And it just has this sort of beautiful, unbelievable, feel-good effect on a whole country. And Kylian Mbappé, the fact that he comes from Bondy, which is one of the worst or one of the most affected suburbs in terms of unemployment. When there were the riots for 3 weeks in 2005, Bondy was one of the most sort of violent and most badly affected areas. And, Mbappe's kind of grown up through all this and he's come through it unscathed, as it were. But he's now like a wonderful role model. And I see it firsthand with my children who took an instant shine to him and his goal celebrations, and I see what it's like on the playgrounds in France. And he's very much the central figure of my book, but the book does tell the story of all those ups and downs over the last 20 years.
But the fact is as well, his generation, people about his age, don't remember the first World Cup success, even though it is reasonably recent, being 22 years ago.
Yeah, and that probably helps, to be honest. For quite a long time, I think French football has suffered from the comparison with their predecessors, because after '98, Jacquet's team kind of became the blueprint for French football. They wanted to develop more Desailly's and Vieiras and, of course, Zidane's as well, if possible. But the French have been very guilty. The media have been very guilty of saying, here we are, we've had about a dozen new Zidanes, and some of those guys, have disappeared without trace. Kamel Meriem and Mourad Megni, who were really talented young kids. Others have got closer, Samir Nasri, Yohan Gourcuff, but none of them have been able to sort of live up to that billing. And there have been many new Vieiras and new Desailly's as well. And I think it's probably a help that Mbappe and Pogba don't really remember those players, and they can make a team in their own image and be their own people, their own players.
And in terms of Paris Saint-Germain being so dominant for so long over the past decade or so, how's that viewed within France? Is that seen as a bad thing for the quality overall, or is it just, they're the best and deservedly so, and they're our team for the Champions League, and if anybody's going to have success in Europe, it's them?
I was always very positive. I think in the first sort of 4 or 5 years, the French very much welcomed, the arrival of big names, Ibrahimovic and Thiago Silva, etc., and having this great team. And in 2016-17, Monaco managed to rival them and managed to win the league title. And the problem in France has been that the other big teams, Marseille, Lyon, to an extent Monaco, to an extent, I don't know, you could include Bordeaux, but I mean, they just haven't been able to build and get anywhere near Paris Saint-Germain. So while I thought for a while it was good and it looked like PSG, they had this 5-year plan to win the Champions League, and they started knocking Chelsea out and they were getting to the quarterfinals, and you thought, here we go, it's gonna kick on, but actually it's gone the other way, and they've started bottling it and they've started going out in the last 16 and walking the domestic title, and that I would say has definitely had a more kind of negative impact in the country. So it was fun for a while, but now, the gap is so big and no one can quite see where the next challenger is coming from, and yet they're still not doing any better in the Champions League. So I would say, it's having more of a negative effect. But again, I don't want to put the blame on PSG. They can take some of the blame for some of their Champions League cock-ups, but the blame for me has to come more from the Lyons and the Marseilles, who've just been unable to put together a strong enough team. I'm not saying they should be winning the league, but they shouldn't be 30 points behind PSG.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Will. I mean, we talked about it last week, Matt. It was one of the observation we made. I think you're right on that point that basically Lyon, Marseille, Monaco, those clubs, they have a large budget. They should be able to attract players and try to compete with PSG. And the problem is, it's not PSG. It's like those guys. What do they need, to compete with PSG and not, falling behind 15 points? And I think it's down to the model of those clubs. Monaco, like even Bordeaux or Lille, are more or less, trading clubs. What they want is just to get players and sell them. There's not ambition, and they're not ambitious enough. Try to catch a PSG. It's more trading players, making money to the clubs and the shareholders to that extent. I know Lyon, they have a large budget. We're talking about 300 million around that, and are miles away where they should be. And that's an issue in terms of from the coaching staff, from the scouting as well department. They have to look at it. The players are bringing the club, but surely that's an issue is to be addressed. With those clubs. Yeah,
I've always been a fan and an advocate of Jean-Michel Aulas, just because I think he's done such an incredible job with Lyon, the president since 1987. And at the start of this season, the first 2 games, they beat Monaco 3-0, then they beat Angers 6-0. And I was thinking, here we go, we're going to have a proper title race. And I just thought they had the quality. Dembele and Depay were scoring goals. Aouar was looking good in midfield. And it just went completely off the rails. And you look at the appointments he made, Juninho coming back as a sporting director. Again, that excited me because such a wonderful footballer, such a great guy. But how qualified is he as a sporting director? And it doesn't look like Aulas has given him really the power that maybe a sporting director should have. And the appointment of Silvinho obviously backfired, and he was sacked after 3 months. And I was, really surprised. And I honestly thought Lyon were going to compete with PSG this season, but I was completely wrong.
Just going back to the book, Matt, I think I first met you actually very briefly at a France-Switzerland World Cup qualifier back in 2005. I was on exchange in Paris at the time. It was a 0-0 draw. David Trezeguet, the man who scored the winning goal in Euro 2000, was being booed by the French supporters at the Stade de France. Can't remember why. I think he was just missing a couple of chances. He was going through a bad time. They were obviously in Ireland's group at the time. And I was just thinking, have you got any answers as to why there's so many peaks and troughs with France? Because you think back, you have that team that was unloved under Dominic, and then they persuade Zidane, Makelele and Thuram to come out of retirement. They reach the World Cup in 2006. You have Thierry Henry's handball in 2009, the training ground boycott disaster in South Africa. There's so many points, even going to the whole Karim Benzema, Mathieu Valbuena thing. There's so many points in French football history where they seem to press the self-destruct button, and then they have so many good players that when they do get it right, they get it right in spectacular fashion, like in 2018.
Yeah. Funny, I remember Not sure. Yeah, no, I do remember meeting you, but I remember that night. I remember that night. I think Henry was booed and Trezeguet were booed. And I just remember thinking, my goodness me, like imagine having strikers like that and booing them. Like they'd missed a couple of chances. And yeah, that France was struggling under Dominic. They were getting a lot of 0-0 draws. But yeah, Stephane might be able to tell you more than me. But the French fans, especially in Paris, can be a bit fickle. They get the name the Footix, which was the mascot of the '98 World Cup. Yeah, a lot of them, I'm not speaking for all of them, there are a lot of proper football fans in Paris as well, but a lot of them were, got into football when France were winning and just expected them to win. So, not being able to beat Switzerland at home, well, we better boost some of our players. But I don't think we can blame the fans for for the highs and the lows so much. I think probably weak management from the federation's point of view. I mean, there was absolutely no way Raymond Domenech, should have survived Euro 2008. He was already a dead man walking. Euro 2008, France were absolutely terrible. And when they didn't sack him, because I think the federation president probably would have had to stand down as well. And there are these guys who pull strings in France. Gérard Houllier is one of them, and Houllier was backing Domenech. Anyway, it's very political, I think. And Domenech stayed on, and he just lost any lingering respect he had, any authority he had. It had disappeared. And that World Cup campaign already, which ended with Henry's handball against your lot, was pretty shambolic. From a collective, from a team point of view, they finished second behind Serbia, and they muscled through getting the odd win against Belarus and countries like that because there was some brilliance from Ribéry or Gorkiev. It was nothing to do with the team play. They had no real plan, and Domenech was telling Nicola Anelka to play as the centre forward, and Anelka was sort of saying, well, actually, I prefer a free role. I prefer dropping deep, and that's what I do with Chelsea. And Domenech said, no, that's not what I want. But he just did Anelka did what he wanted. So I think there's that, a lack of authority. I think there's probably something in the culture of the French players, and I don't want to tar all of France's youth with the same sort of brush, but there was definitely a different kind of mentality with the players coming through, whether it was a Nasri, Benzema, that whole sort of generation, the team that was winning youth tournaments, Nasri, Benzema, Ben Arfa and Menez, who were supposed to have wonderful careers and I think thought they were superstars before they actually were. And, we all know about the Nasri taking Thierry Henry's seat on the bus, and that was just one little story. But I think there was a lot of little moments like that going on where you had Thuram and Henry and Vieira thinking, wow, who the hell are these guys? And what have they done in their careers? And it all made for a pretty explosive cocktail. Yeah. I mean, it's hard, it's a culmination of a lot of different factors, I think. But they certainly became the new Dutch, didn't they? The masters of creating problems when there shouldn't really have been any.
And in terms of the people you interviewed, then would they put their finger on why things were so right in '98 and 2018?
It's very difficult to get, first of all, to get anyone who was there in 2010, and then to get them to talk. There seems to be like this unofficial pact that nobody says anything about what actually happened at Neissner when they all decided to go on strike. But probably Lilian Thuram, who's a very, very interesting guy and a very intelligent guy. I'd say he was probably the most interesting, and he retired in 2008. And in his last game, when they went out of Euro 2008, he said, everybody was sort of just getting changed, getting ready to go home, probably like sorting out their holiday plans. And he was overcome by emotion and just started crying. And because his 142 cap career was coming to an end, and it was just a very sad end. And he then gave a speech to everybody and said, listen, you guys you've got to learn that you can't achieve anything on your own. And I think he tried to give a speech talking about his career, saying, I've achieved this and it's been incredible, but it's all thanks to my teammate. And this is a team game, and we have to, hoping that the message would kind of go through. And he talked about that. He talked about having long conversations with Vieira about the new generation, and they were trying to understand why they don't get it. And he said he took one youngster to one side and said, you're going to be a big player in the coming years. You've got to wake up. You've got to realize that the way you're behaving, the way you're talking to the media, the way you're acting with teammates, it's not good enough. This is not how a leader of the France team. And I said to him, because I was absolutely certain, I said it was Samir Nasri, wasn't it? And Thuram looked at me and said, I'm not telling you who it was, but he was really interesting. Olivier Giroud was quite interesting as well, because he's very much in the mold of a team player who doesn't have the talent of a lot of the players that I mentioned, and yet he is the guy who has been picked more than any other player under Didier Deschamps. And he started in 2012, and he was at Euro 2012 as a substitute. He felt already at the time that it was a team of individuals, and he really bought into Deschamps' ethos. Deschamps came in after Euro 2012 and said, it's all about the team. And Deschamps has often been criticised for picking, say, Moussa Sissoko, constantly on the right side of midfield rather than one of France's many talented attacking players. But he wanted guys who would just respect exactly, what the guidelines are and would put the team ahead of anything else. And I think Giroud, for all his shortcomings, has always done that in his career.
Yeah, that to me, anyway, is the biggest, or the best thing that Deschamps did, was to get rid of those potential bad apples despite all the pressure, and get everyone involved and pulling in the same direction. And that game that changed everything, I guess, when you look back, was the World Cup playoff in 2014 as far as Deschamps was concerned. 2-0 down against Ukraine, and then they win 3-0 in the return. Interesting goal scorers in that game, Saka with 2 and Benzema. It's funny how that sliding door moment happened, and Deschamps went on, obviously had the success he did.
Yeah, no, it would have been the end, of course. It would have been the end for Deschamps had they failed to qualify for that World Cup. And yeah, on paper, it looks like a good win, but it doesn't look like anything that unbelievable that France can beat Ukraine 3-0 at home. But it had never happened in a World Cup playoff in Europe that a team had come from 2 goals down. And France had actually been pretty average under Deschamps. I think his first year in charge was the worst in terms of results of any France manager. He was under significant pressure, and the way they played in Ukraine, it was just so familiar. It resembled a lot of the car crashes that we'd seen in recent years. They just didn't turn up. They didn't look interested. They were jittery at the back. My friend, as an Arsenal fan, Laurent Koscielny, just complete disaster. Gave away a penalty, got sent off at the end. And yeah, I talked to Guy Stephane in quite some detail about, Guy Stephane is Deschamps' assistant, in quite some detail about how they turned it around. And he talked about the 3 days leading up to that second leg and how Deschamps gave all these incredible team talks, and how the two of them were having individual chats with players, and they were getting them to watch amazing footage of how good they were. They put these compilations, look, you're an incredible player. They got them to watch this film, which Guy Stephane told me was good, but I've since found out is terrible. I think it's called La Marche, it was with Jamel Debbouze, who is an actor that a lot of the players like. He's very popular. And it was about a march against discrimination that happened back in the 1980s, when a group of people got together and they marched from Marseille they marched from somewhere in the countryside to Paris. And it was just about people from all sorts of cultures and races coming together and triumphing in adversity. And that was apparently the key to it all. But yeah, he made some interesting decisions, picking Benzema, who hadn't been scoring, picking Valbuena. He picked Yohan Cabaye in a central holding midfield role, and Cabaye just had an absolute stormer with Matuidi and Pogba either side of him. He dropped Eric Abidal and played Sakho alongside Varane. That was surprising, and it all paid off. But also the French public, and I had a bit of a pop about the Paris supporters, but the Stade de France that night was amazing as well. And everybody had their tricolor flags, and everybody was so up for it. And you really did feel like something had happened that night. When you look back at the World Cup, we're now in 2018. There's no question the journey started that night in Saint-Denis at the Stade de France. Deschamps was given the bumps, and Giroud led the rendition of the Marseillaise. He got the microphone. Benzema also had the tricolor flag over him, which was very significant because people have often questioned his patriotism, the fact that he doesn't sing the Marseillaise. So yeah, definitely a big night. Who knows what would have happened? But I say that was kind of the turning point going to the World Cup. There was actually at the World Cup, and the start of my book talks about this, how they'd been so average in the group stages in Russia, and they'd laboured past Australia, got a 1-0 win against Peru, and then they drew 0-0 with Denmark. It was a second string team. It was one of the worst games ever in World Cup history, and the France fans were all booing them off. And I remember talking to France fans in Kazan, and they were all ready to go home, looking forward to Zidane taking over because he'd just left Real Madrid. And it kind of felt like, the Deschamps thing was over, but Didier had other ideas.
Yeah, it's something very interesting about Didier Deschamps, and it's trademark as a leader. Prior to the Ukraine return leg, he was very confident, even after the last 2-0 in Ukraine. In his mind, there's no doubt, France is going to qualify. But if you reflect on, Deschamps' career as a player as well, he was very, very confident and always in control. If you remember in 2000 when France played Italy in the final of the Euro, obviously France has to equalize, to go to extra times. And the only one who was running to get the ball at the throw-ins was Deschamps. He was one of the rare players on the pitch to believe he was feasible to score that goal to bring France to the extra times. And that's epitomized, Deschamps' leadership and, ability, to believe even in the worst situation, he will be there. And he's really the main driver of the French team for the last few years now. And people dispute, his style, but clearly, like, that game against Ukraine, yes, it's a start, for Deschamps' era. But also we can't forget, the Euro final lost in France. It could have, been a disaster for the French team for the World Cup, but he managed to bounce back again. And it's down to his leadership, his ability as well to build a team around him and players he can trust. And he's very loyal to the players as well. Like Giroud is a perfect example of it.
Yeah, but it's interesting what you said about the Euro 2000 final, because that's exactly what Robert Pires said to me. He said, "Oh, we had to keep believing," and then he looked at me and said, "But nobody believed. Nobody believed apart from one person, and that was Deschamps. And he was barking at us, shouting at us, and he had that mentality, that suited him so much in Italy as well. And that's what the French always say. We did the Italians at their own game, if you like, in that they nicked that equaliser at the end and." But you're right. It seems that Deschamps was the one person, because Italy getting a goal against them, it was such a tight contest. But France as well, they had those substitutes. Pires was one of the substitutes. He came on against Portugal as well. They would send on Pires, Wiltord, and Trezeguet, and that's pretty useful as well to have, sort of going into extra time, isn't it?
And have you managed, through your book, to talk to some of the coaches or managers at the time? Like maybe Raymond Domenech? I know he doesn't give many interviews, but...
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed, actually, because Raymond, I was in touch with him and he agreed to do the interview. And then he just sort of kept dodging me and I couldn't get the rendezvous sorted. So, yeah, Aimé Jacquet, I would have loved to have got as well. Didn't manage to. So...
Difficult.
It's mainly players. I tried hard with Deschamps, of course, and ended up with Guy Stephane, which shouldn't be seen as a consolation because he's a very, very good guy. Was also the assistant to Roger Lemaire in 2000, and so he's been through a lot and he knows Deschamps perfectly. Worked with him at Marseille as well as with France. So in terms of coaches, I spoke to Gérard Houllier. I spoke to Houllier a lot. I talk a lot about the French sort of the youth structure and the coaching system, and Houllier was very important in the sort of late 80s, early 90s, setting everything up at Clairefontaine. So he was very happy to talk to me about how he kind of laid the groundwork for France's future success.
I'm sure.
And Arsene Wenger as well. As I had a chat with him, and Arsene has written the foreword in the book. Chatted to Reynald Denouix, who's very highly respected and very intelligent coach who did such wonderful work at Nantes and knows a lot as well when it comes to youth development. So hopefully there's quite a lot of good coaching input in there. But it's kind of endless as well. Where it's sort of in terms of the people, I'd love to have spoken to 50 more people, and maybe I have to keep that for the next book.
And, from your book, did you see a different style of coaches, a different style of leadership from one coach to the other ones? I mean, when you're writing the book, obviously you have to think about, let's say, Houllier and Deschamps and Domenech and Lemaire. And do you see a trend, because we know, if you're a foreigner and you look at, the French system, the French Federation, at some point, after the World Cup, they tried to sell the model of the French, if you want, products and the way we produce the players in France. And I know Germany was interested. I mean, Spain went to France, Brazil as well. And, we tried to explore ideas and the way we produce players. But have you seen anything like that, across the different? Because, for example, Le Maire is from the French Federation, more or less. Dominic, to some extent, they all come through the youth, and then they get the position of the national coach. And Deschamps is the only one who didn't go through that, didn't go through the federal path, if you want, and came from the club.
Obviously, Dominic's sort of past with the federation, with the under-21s, was one of the main reasons that he got the job in 2004. There is a chapter about French coaching. It's not particularly positive, but more in terms of the recent years and the way that in Ligue 1 they seem to recycle a lot of the same coaches, and they seem to be stuck a little bit in the same mindset. I think the coaching philosophy in France, is defined in Clairefontaine. Gerard Houllier was very influential with that in the 1990s. I think one of the big problems was that they got a bit complacent after winning the World Cup and the Euros. Aimé Jacquet, the coach in 98, became the technical director. And speaking to people who worked a lot on the French game back then, they say that Aimé Jacquet just was an awful appointment, actually. He's a revered figure in France, but he didn't have the appetite to carry on working at a grassroots level in French football, and basically took advantage of France's position in the world game. Didn't do anything. Didn't really take anything forward for the next 9 years. And what's interesting, Stephane, is that when Laurent Blanc takes charge in 2010, and soon after that there is the quota scandal that comes out. Now, there's a lot that can be said about the quota scandal, but one of the main issues that they were discussing, apart from the one of dual nationality, where France are training players who can go on to represent another nation, one of the main problems that Laurent Blanc felt there was France was developing the same type of player. He felt that sort of, smaller players were getting overlooked at the age of 12 or 13, and that French academies wanted big, strong, physical footballers. And Laurent Blanc made the link between that and there being a lot of black kids being taken into the academies. I think, it was also a time when Spain were dominating French football, and there was this famous quote from Laurent Blanc, which sounds absolutely awful, when he said, when I go to Spain, they say to me, here, we don't have any problems because we don't have any blacks. I mean, that sounds dreadful taken in isolation. In the context of the actual meeting, it still sounds quite bad. But Laurent Blanc's point was, and he made this, he said, if we had Xavi and Iniesta in France, if they were kids growing up in France, they probably wouldn't have turned professional because they wouldn't have got into academies. And that in itself is pretty shocking. And France had somebody like Antoine Griezmann who was struggling, and only when he moved to Spain at the age of 15 did he start to flourish. So, while it was dealt with in a very sort of clumsy, and there were racial or racist undertones to what was said, I think there was a need as well for France to change the criteria. And I'm certainly not talking about skin color or race or culture, but the type of footballers they were recruiting for the academies at the age of 12. And I think that started, with the 98 success. 98, there was Zidane, who was absolutely wonderful. And, there were a lot of wonderful footballers, but the real strength of that team was that it was so strong, so athletic, so solid. And that kind of provided the bedrock, I think, for the French game for several years after that.
Did you feel like, again, going back to 98, a lot of people, thinking in France, or, abroad as well, that was, 98, the peak of French football in 2000. But in fact, from a French perspective, was, decline. That was, announcing the decline of French football, because you talk about, the academies. And yes, I mean, if you look at, the structure of the French team in 1998, we wanted to replicate the same with, let's say, in the middle of the park with strong guys, physical guys, because it was a physical team. There's not a question, because Stephane Guivard didn't score a single goal in the World Cup. but it was based on solid, defensive, obviously a mindset and players. If you look at the team, Carambe, Manuel Petit, Deschamps, and so on, and Patrick Vieira, and we tried, to replicate the same type of players. And have you seen that? Have you seen the change when you wrote the book across, from '98 up to now? That a trend, a change in French football, or do you think it's exactly the same?
It's a good question. I still think it's a problem. I don't know if it's exactly the same, but I do think it's still a problem. I think that clubs, academies want to win, or are under pressure to win, and the best way of doing that, is to get 13, 14-year-olds who are bigger than the rest and stronger than the rest, and that's not always good for the development of the French game. And I was reading an interview with Claude Puel a few weeks ago, and he came back from having worked at Southampton and at Leicester, and he said Ligue 1 hasn't changed. We still have too many players who penetrate through their physical strength, because we are still picking players based on their size. I think it's a deep-rooted problem, and the fact that Ligue 1 shows so much reticence to, I don't know, does it show so much? I think it does. I think it shows reticence to foreign coaches. The way that Silvino was treated, notably by Raymond Domenech, who is the president of the coaches union here in France, and he's also a Lyon legend. Every time Lyon lost under Silvino, Domenech was on Twitter saying, what a ridiculous appointment, Genesio was doing great and all this. And I do feel like, French coaches, it's still a closed shop and they still protect each other. But ultimately, it's at the grassroots level. It's the youth structures that have to change. So while there is a lot more discussion and I think things have evolved, I still think there is some way to go. And Ligue 1 still has a problem when it comes to number of goals scored and general entertainment. There are too many games that in the first half, nothing happens. And at half time, the players say, on est bien en place, like they're happy, we're in position. It's good. Yeah, but nobody's trying to score a goal. And that, I commentate a lot of games where I think, why don't we just start in the second half, guys? Because it's always 0-0 at half time.
I've done a few of those as well. Having lived in Paris for a few years myself, and seeing that, I guess, decline from the last great side of 2006, I guess, with Zidane and Makelele and Thuram and all those guys. The X factor for me is, and for everyone, I guess, is Mbappe, because he's the difference between France not winning Euro 2016. They couldn't beat a Portugal side without Cristiano, who had Cristiano Ronaldo injured very early, lose on home soil against Portugal in the final. And then the big difference is Mbappe. If you think about the knockout games in World Cup 2018, how much of a difference can he make? He obviously has made a big difference to French football already, but how much more of a difference can he make in the future?
I think he can go on. I think he can go on and help France to win more competitions. He's a guy who, as far as he's concerned, he's only just starting, and that's what is incredible, I think, with Mbappe as well. He didn't even celebrate the World Cup crazily. The next day when they were going to the Champs-Élysées, he was sitting next to the French FA president, Noël Le Graët, and he apparently, according to Le Graët, he said to him, "Do we really have to do this?" And he was already sort of thinking about how he needs to sort of recover and get ready for the next season. It was the same when he won the league when he was 17 at Monaco. Everyone's going crazy, and he was just sort of soaking it up, but thinking, well, it's just the beginning. It's incredible to win the World Cup at 19 and go, yeah, now I want to win more. But that's the case, and he is amazing. I think maybe you're a bit harsh to say, Euro 2016 they couldn't even beat Portugal. I mean, yeah, it was disappointing not to beat Portugal in the final, but done quite well in that competition, and they played very well against Germany. And there was already kind of this feeling that this new generation of Varane, Pogba, and Griezmann had something special. And I think the one issue, because we know with France they're good at finding problems where there aren't any, I think the one issue could be that Mbappe's status has got so big on a global level that he's actually now bigger than Griezmann, Pogba, and others. Griezmann, I was talking to Vincent Deluc from L'Equipe, and he's witnessed a lot of implosions with the French national team. And he said he thinks it's a genuine concern. He doesn't think Mbappe he's not disliked, but he's not kind of part of one of the boys, It's like, Griezmann and Pogba, it was their generation, and now Mbappe's kind of coming in and taking over. And there is potential there for a bit of unrest. But he's clever enough, Mbappe, I think, not to do anything too stupid, not to rock the boat. And he knows that he needs good players around him as well for France to win. But it's going to be interesting to sort of watch that, because I think, Vincent Deluc was saying to me, he thinks Griezmann is still the biggest star in France. Maybe Mbappe is close to him now. But in the world, Mbappe has just gone way ahead of Griezmann. And I think, that's certainly true.
Yeah, I guess with Euro 2016, to defend myself, Mbappe is the difference in that. I spoke to Antonio Rudiger about after Germany-France in the UEFA Nations League, and kind of asked him what makes him so special. And he just said, like, do you not watch football? But that's exactly the answer I was looking for, because he said, like, he's just so quick. He's impossible to mark. One person can't keep him quiet. You need more than one to take care of him. And I just think he adds so much, and hopefully will continue developing the way he is.
And I think, looking at Mbappe, one of the concerns, like Vincent Deluc, it's becoming, a kind of a global brand. And if you look at, what happened last summer, he was promoting a lot, in the States, or he went to different, countries, and he's a very smart guy. But, ultimately, I think he's lucky to have Deschamps around him with a French team, and to make sure he's on the right path, because, at some point, you have to make a decision. It's going to be football, it's going to be marketing. And apparently he's well surrounded, and the family is around him, and we'll keep an eye tightly on him. But still, like, everything can go very quickly in football. So hopefully it will stay that way, and he can focus on football. But there is that side of football, and that becoming a global brand like Ronaldo. But it's about managing both if you can. And he's such a young guy. He's very mature for his age, and people forget about it as well.
15, 20 years ago, I could buy a book by Jonathan Wilson on Eastern European football. Then I could buy Ule Hesse's book on history of German football. There were books by Phil Ball and Jimmy Burns on Spanish football. The only book I had about football in France, it was like Football in France, A Cultural History, published in 2003. And you're talking about a period of 20 years in your book, and we already hear how many stories you can unveil just in 20 years. So why do you think there hasn't been same interest in getting French football stories out for European, firstly probably for English readers, but also for all those who can read in English all around Europe?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I'm a little bit bemused by it. People might say, well, we're not interested in the French League. Not many people, certainly, in the UK are interested in the French League. But at the same time, the French players and managers have had such a massive influence in the Premier League and in football in general. I always assumed, somebody else would write the book. And when they won the World Cup in 2018, I thought, okay, now I really have to move and write this book, because they're the world champions now again. So I don't know. The literary agent I had who was trying to sell the idea to publishers had, I wouldn't say she had a lot of knockbacks, but she had a lot of publishers saying French football makes me cold, or I don't know, or I just, I can understand that it doesn't inspire the same warmth that maybe Italian football and the culture, the Italian football culture, which is incredible. But when you think about guys like Mbappe, we haven't even mentioned Eric Cantona. I mean, I don't talk that much about him in the book because, with the national team, he didn't do that much. But, so many incredible football players, so many incredible stories. I've always looked at it as well and thought, well, hang on, how many books are there on Spanish football, German football, Italian football? Okay, even if we say the French League is only the fifth in terms of interest, there should be something out there. So hopefully people will be interested.
No, because obviously I'm looking forward to reading it, and people in UK, they have an example of Eric Cantona changing one club's history. Well, we can say, Sir Alex Ferguson, he was genius. He brought him in, but Eric just had to pull up this stuff, and that's it. Manchester United started winning titles, and then had David Ginola also playing in England at the same time and being one of the best players in the league. So that was always something that bothered me, honestly. And if you just go back in history and you go the fantastic team of '58, with Fontaine and Coppa, and then Harms playing European Cup finals, and then in the '70s you had Saint-Etienne with Platini, and also the team that played the European Cup final. And then '82, '84, '86, we talked about them in different editions of this podcast. There was an absolutely incredible side.
Absolutely. I feel a bit bad I don't mention the '84 team as much. I obviously do mention them, but it was Emmanuel Petit. He said that was an incredible team, and he was inspired by the Carré Magique of Gires, Fernandez, Tigana, and Platini. But he said, unfortunately for them, they were born too early, or they did it too early, because it was in '98 where the world was kind of just ready to embrace football, or certainly France was ready to embrace football. And football really sort of became popular for the whole country in '98, whereas in '84 it was a big sport, but I think it was seen as a lower class sort of sport, and it was a little bit like frowned upon by the middle and upper classes. And then later it became fashionable. But there are a lot of stories, no question.
Best of luck with the book when it comes out, Matt, and best of luck with the reprint if that happens as well, ahead of Euro 2021. And how are France shaping up for that at the moment, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's probably good. I mean, it's not good for anyone. The Euros isn't happening this summer, but France have had, the big players have had a tough season. A lot of them have been injured. Griezmann's taken a bit of time at Barcelona to show his best form. We know Pogba hasn't played very much. So, a lot of these top players haven't had great preparation for a summer tournament. So, they're having a good break now, an enforced break. And hopefully, from France's point of view, they'll have a proper season behind them. N'Golo Kanté, another one who's had a difficult season, Raphael Varane. So, I think France might have struggled to win the Euros this summer, but next summer they'll probably be okay.
Thanks, Matt. Hope the book goes well.
Thanks a lot.
That's it for this week. Back early next week with more. Please remember to rate and subscribe no matter what your service is. You can leave comments on our Twitter page, Lockdown Football, and shows are now going up on YouTube also. So until next time, from Mark Rodden, Stephane, Jauny, Dmytro, Dzhulai, and me, Will Downing, it's goodbye.